Actually, someone mentioned that the tree's huge, so I thought we could actually stroll out and show them the entire tree in its entirety, how large it looks.
Yeah, it's
It's a pretty large tree compared to what it used to have, as it didn't actually have a tree before. It had a generic tree.
yeah, it's a little bit more bespoke now.
Yeah, a little bit more bespoke than that. Hello, and we're back. And this time I'm joined by Amy, one of our content designers who's been working in Italy. Talk a little about what you've been working on.
Yeah, so I've been working on Ethiopia this year. This is my first focus tree working at Paradox, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
In particular, I've been working on the alternate history branches. So on the fascist path, it's mainly focused on backstabbing the Ethiopian emperor and siding with the Italians initially. And as you get further down the tree, you've got a choice of, like, do you be a good subject, or do you just backstab once again and try and break free of Italy as well? Meanwhile, on the communist branch, it's more about building up Ethiopia to be a communist power in East Africa. The Soviet path is very inspired by stuff that kind of happened historically later on, in the Cold War, for example. But here we're having that happen a little bit earlier. Or if you go down the anarchist path, it's again, it's a bit different. It's more trying to form a coalition of like-minded people from across the globe to fight fascism in East Africa. So while it might sound kind of similar, that you can end up as a puppet either of the Soviet Union or Italy, the Italian path is a lot more, should we say, about extracting resources from Italy.
Yeah, no, I agree.
From Ethiopia.
Yeah, no, I agree. Actually, I was thinking when we're talking about a fascist tree, we could take a little bit of a look on how it's currently structured in the focus tree to actually break free. How are we able to do that?
Yeah, so once you get down to this sort of area, this is where you need to start making decisions about, are you going to be loyal to Italy, or are you going to try and break away? So if you continue down on this side, you've got a bunch of focuses to basically just be the absolute worst puppet imaginable, such as setting up trade barriers against the Italians, so that they can't get as much of your resources, bringing back exiles into Ethiopia to try and build up a resistance against the Italian occupation. And as we move further down, there's options for raiding Italian depots, which is always fun, stealing weapons to use against the Italians. And also there's our enemy's enemy, which allows you to get support from the other great powers, because obviously there's a lot of people at this time who don't want to see Italy expand in Africa. And then once you've built up resources, such as like weapons and international support, you can actually like declare independence here, which, depending on the situation in the world, might go really smoothly. Italy might just go, okay, whatever, I'm not going to deal with this. But if Italy's feeling a bit more vengeful, they might clamp down pretty hard. So you have to be prepared for that.
It might be really good as a player then to take a look at the world map and see if Italy in that game was truly the weak underbelly of Germany.
Yeah, because you don't want to end up being defeated
twice
within the space of a few
years. Best.
Yeah.
And on the communist path, you could go under the Soviet Union, correct?
Yeah, so...
And is there a way to perhaps break free from them?
Yeah, so initially, this bit here on the branch is obviously getting resources from the Soviets to beat the Italians in that first war. And then eventually the Soviets will try and mediate on Ethiopia's behalf to bring the war to an end. But as you come down here, it becomes a bit more economic focused on building Ethiopia up. But eventually you can take this option here, which is like our own path, and that will let you break free of the Soviet Union. And again, depending on the state of the world, if Germany's almost at Moscow, the Soviets probably aren't going to put up much resistance. That
it's all about trying to think carefully as a player and seeing what the world state is. You can't only watch your own country and hope for the best.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit of a repeating sort of mentality to have for Ethiopia, is that you're always the underdog.
Yeah.
So you always need to be aware of what the major powers are doing. And you're trying to take advantage of the chaos in the world. Yeah. So when Britain and France are too busy dealing with Germany and Italy and Europe, that's a good time to try and snipe some colonies from them.
And actually, if we look at the bottom there, we see the African Union.
Yeah. So this is where it's super useful to have those former colonies in Africa liberated, because you can actually invite them to join the African Union, and initially it starts off with mutual defense and some economic cooperation, but as time goes on you can actually like integrate those countries together. So initially that'll be creating puppets of Ethiopia, and then eventually you get a national spirit which will lower your puppets' autonomy pretty quickly, and you integrate them together into the African Union.
Yeah. And as I saw someone regarding asking if you can get cores on all of Africa, is that something closely remotely possible if you do this?
Yeah, it is. It is possible to get cores on all of Africa. It might take a little bit of time, but it's worth it. It's pretty fun.
It's worth it. It sounds like a lot of manpower.
Yeah.
You can probably do a little bit of a world conquest of that.
Yeah, it's because obviously a lot of the countries in Africa aren't as industrialized as places in Europe and Asia. So it kind of gives you an advantage getting that massive manpower bonus, though, and it can really make a difference on the world stage.
Yeah. And when we're also looking at the end stages of these branches, what's the end stage for the fascist one?
Yeah, so if we go down this side, being a good little puppet of the Italians. Yeah. We had to form the Italo-Ethiopian Empire. And that's about really like merging those two crowns between Italy and Ethiopia into one cohesive union, rather than just being, a colony and just kind of under the thumb of the Italians. You're more of a partner with the Italians at that point. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Endgame is more about trying to, like I said earlier, take advantage of the world state and try and take over some of that.
Try to claim as much of Africa as possible.
Yeah.
Actually, someone mentioned that the tree's huge, so I thought we could actually stroll out and show them the entire tree in its entirety, how large it looks.
Yeah, it's
a pretty large tree compared to what it used to have. As it didn't actually have a tree before, it had a generic tree.
Yeah, it's a little bit more bespoke now.
Yeah, a little bit more bespoke now.
But yeah, I've mainly been working on these two bits, and Thomas did a lot of the imperial. So yeah, we actually have a portrait for the leader of the communists. So this guy was actually historically he was the chairman of the Black Lions, which was an anti-fascist group. And Hoy were kind of playing with that a little bit and having him as the leader of the Communist Party, but obviously that can kind of split into the anarcho-communist or the full-on Stalinist sort of path. And we don't have the artwork yet, but if you go down the Soviet path, there will be more of a military dictatorship type portrait that's going to be coming there, which should be cool when it's implemented.
Yeah, it sounds really fun. I thought we could actually take a look if there's, I believe, if the advisors, if they've been put in yet?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of folks.
Yes. A new administration and a Japanese anarcho-communism.
Yeah, so this one was really interesting to research. There was a lot of cultural ties between Ethiopia and Japan, seeing each other as kindred spirits and being non-European empires in the world. And there was also Japanese anarcho-communists at the time period, so we thought it would be interesting if Japan is still fascist, then maybe these guys look for greener pastures.
Yeah, greener pastures over in Ethiopia.
Yeah, and try and change the world from there instead.
Yeah, try to help out as advisors in a new glorious empire.
Yeah. We also have some in here as well, so...
Take a look.
Yeah, so Sylvia Pankhurst, I believe, was already in the game for the United Kingdom, but she is available in Ethiopia if she's not already in the UK doing stuff there. We also have Senadu Gebru, and I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm not the best at pronouncing Ethiopian names, but she was a really interesting character to research as well. She was part of the resistance against the Italians during the Second World War. We have Emma Goldman, international anarchist, so it's quite exciting to add her as well. And of course, we're two Japanese anarcho-communists. And for anybody who's not aware, you can't have both of these advisors at the same time because historically they really hated each other. So you have to think carefully about which one you actually want at any given time.
Well, I wouldn't believe I would see an Ethiopian heavy battleship. But, well...
it might be stretching things a little bit, but if you're in the alternate history path, I think
well, if you're able to
fun.
reunite the entirety of Africa, I believe you can put some resources into building a glorious ship.
Yeah, and the inspiration for this kind of came from, I think there was a few Soviet battleships during World War II that they never actually got to finish because of the German invasion. So the idea here is like, well, maybe those unfinished hulls could end up in Ethiopia eventually, and Ethiopia finishes them.
They never disappeared. They went to Ethiopia. We could channel that.
Yeah. I also really like having the option to purchase old ships is really cool because it means you actually have like a ragtag fleet of British destroyers and like maybe some German U-boats and like cruisers from somewhere else, and it's a real just ragtag fleet.
They're a little mercenary underdog fleet to try to conquer the Mediterranean.
Yeah, and obviously being next to the Red Sea and just next to Suez, it's quite a nice choke point where you can do like a lot of damage depending on who you're fighting.
And maybe even if you build enough of these cool heavy battleships, you're able to take on Ethiopia's own mighty fleet.
Yeah.
So actually, I thought we could take a little look at the anti-colonial mechanic.
Sure.
And how that is really fun to see.
So there's two variations of it's a similar mechanic but a little bit different in each one. If we go for the African wildfire, which is on the anarcho-communist side, let's take that. Have a look in here. Yeah, so we get these options to spread some propaganda against the different powers in Africa. So we'll click around here and you can see all over the place. I mean, I think at Game Start Ethiopia is the only independent country in Africa, so there's a lot of places to choose from where you want to really rile things up. So let's say we're going to do some anti-British propaganda.
Yeah, and this also works similar to the how it works when you click on the map on Spam Civil War. You can only do one at a time.
Yeah, so we didn't want it to be too much of a snowball effect of...
You have to pick your targets carefully, again, reiterating the underdog situation.
Yeah. I'm just going to avoid pieces, please.
Perhaps not be overwhelmed by the Italian might that fast while we're not playing.
It takes a little bit of micromanagement to try and deal with Italy, so it's probably not enough time for that right now. Get rid of these. Okay.
And if you guys in chat have any questions, feel free to ask. We're happy to answer.
So, look at somewhere in... Might need to let it run a little bit longer. But eventually, as we start spreading propaganda about the British, we should start to see resistance gradually build up, and then we should get decisions after a while to start actually sending weapons in to that region. And obviously, once resistance gets to a certain point, then there's a chance that that place will actually try and break away from the colonial power.
You try to get them some propaganda, maybe give them some arms to break free on their own, and then they could join our little empire.
Yeah, and assuming by this point, because to get at this point, obviously, you're quite far down the Ethiopian focus tree. You should have quite a bit of industry and a bit more weight in world affairs, so I think it might take a little bit too long to show the whole thing, but once these places break free and, like, let's say, if Sudan breaks away from Britain and it'll start initially at war with Britain, you can actually step in and tell the British, like, hey, you should back off from Sudan now, because if you don't stop, we're going to join the war, and then, you know, for the British, it ends up risking, like, the whole conflict blowing up, and if this is happening in 1941, the British have got bigger concerns than what's going on
they
in
definitely
East
do.
Africa.
As with the Battle of Britain being that close at that time, they might have a few other things to worry about.
Yeah.
I thought we could maybe talk a little about all the current formable nations that Ethiopia is able to do outside of, as we already do have the African Union, that you're able to get all of Africa if you really try hard.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you can form with Ethiopia?
Yes, so there's quite a few. There's even so it's kind of interesting because even in the imperial historical timeline, it's because Ethiopia starts at war, it very quickly becomes non-historical.
Yeah.
So even on this one, we have a few different formable nations. So we have the Empire of Zion.
Empire of Solomon.
Yep. Which also allows you to move the capital of the empire to Palestine, which for anybody who doesn't know, the Ethiopian aristocracy claim to be descended from King Solomon, so that's where the tie comes from there. Let's see, what else? There's the Italo-Ethiopian Empire.
Where you form a country together, practically.
Yeah. See, there are definitely some more. Oh yeah, there's the Empire of Axum, which is just a fun throwback to one of the precursor states to Ethiopia that was there hundreds of years before Ethiopia came about.
Yeah, I believe I've heard the Axum in actually another draft strategy game.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to do a big grand playthrough of all the Paradox games, you can continue that on in Heartsofiron now as Axum.
Yeah, that's really fun as we're currently doing the Grand Campaign, where we go through all the current active draft strategy games, and that gives another option to do that as Ethiopia.
Yeah, exactly.
Does having government in exile increase resistance for Italian occupation?
There are some options. So some of the, I'm not sure if it's decisions or focuses that unlock it, but you actually get an extra continuous focus here, which is to support the Black Lions, which is the anti-Italian resistance movement within Ethiopia, and that will substantially weaken the Italian grip in the region, and it makes it a lot easier when you actually come to liberating Ethiopia with the allies, if you're going down the historical path. It makes it a lot easier when the Italians are already wasting manpower and weapons on trying to hold on to the country.
That makes sense, and it's really cool that we're adding a new continuous focus so you can get a hold of. Don't believe we've done that previously?
I can't think of another example.
Yeah, so it's really fun if we're adding a new area where we can work on.
Yeah.
And as the last question is, what happens if you choose a country, you go into exile of a country, and that country just capitulated? So let's say you go into Britain, but Britain falls. Does that mean game over for us?
Yeah, basically, because it takes a lot. You have to be on good terms to be able to go into exile in a particular country. So it's not a matter of just Haile Selassie packing his bags and hopping on the plane to somewhere else.
They should maybe like you first so they don't kick you out.
Yeah, so if you go to Britain and Britain falls, then it's game over for Ethiopia as well. So it makes you kind of have to work in a more factional sort of mindset.
So you have to, as we've been talking about, is that Ethiopia is an underdog and you really have to make wise decisions, otherwise it is game over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is actually everything today. Thank you, Amy, for joining me and talking a little about Alt-History Ethiopia. I myself am really excited to try it out a little bit more after when it's released. But other than that, thank you just for joining us in today. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about Ethiopia and more of a gameplay, and then some other fun things. But remember that tomorrow is Developer Diary, and we'll be covering some really fun things that are related to the army. But other than that, if you want to keep up to date, please remember to follow our social medias, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And also we have our Discord you're welcome to join. But other than that, have a lovely continued day, and I'll see you around. Bye-bye.
Bye.